Monday afternoon that I attended. I asked those present, and I do thank them for that briefing, although I do also note that while I asked for all of the submissions that were made to these pieces of legislation, not a single one of those submissions were provided. But one of the answers I did get was with regards to, I think, a question the Honourable Connie Benares raised with regards to whether the modelling had been done on the revenue intended to be raised from this bill and the series of the three gambling bills, if you like, that have been before this council this week. The answer that I got to the question with regards to modelling on revenue was modelling has been done on this bill, as with all pieces of legislation. This is a matter for the Treasurer. So, Treasurer, through you, Chair, as this is a matter for the Treasurer, can the Treasurer please outline what modelling has been done for these bills?
Treasurer.
Mr President, Mr Chairman, thank the member for a question. The advice I've received from Treasury is that the expected increase in revenue starts off at about 2%, which is equivalent to about $6 million extra, and then by I think it's the third year of the forward estimates, it's $9 million, which is 3%. So current revenue in ballpark terms, Mr Chairman, for gaming machine revenue to the state budget is about $300 million. It's a little bit, I think it's a little bit less or a little bit more, depending on which particular year of the forward estimates. But ultimately, and the reason for the what I might call in revenue terms is the ramp up is clearly not everyone will move to the situation straight away. Is the assumption, but I guess the long-term stable prediction is a revenue increase of about 3% on the $300 million, which is approximately $9 million, and that'll be the number that'll be factored into the mid-year budget review on the assumption that the legislation was to pass the chamber.
Ms Franks.
Thank you for that answer. And if, through you, Chair, the Treasurer could provide a breakdown with regards to that increase of that 2% of $6 million and then in later years the 3% of $9 million. How much of that is predicted to come from the casino and how much of that is predicted to come from clubs and hotels?
Treasurer.
Mr Chairman, I'm not in a position to provide that level of detail. In terms of the mid-year budget review aggregates, we're looking at the total revenue collection from gaming machines collectively. So the only number I've got is which was the question which was asked in relation to the total revenue, modelling on revenue, was the total revenue, and it's, as I said, it's eventually going to be estimated to be $9 million or 3% on the total receipts.
Franks.
Thank you, Chair, and I do thank the Treasurer for his answers. A little more detail that I'd be very interested in. If the Treasurer could refresh the Council's memory about the various different percentages, if you like, of revenue that we see received from the machines in the casino, and I think there's two tiers, the VIP and the broader casino, but I'm operating on memory there. And the clubs and the hotels, what percentages do each of those electronic gaming machines provide back?
Mr Chairman, look, I'm happy to take that question on notice. The advisors that I have available to me are essentially non-Treasury advisors. They're the Attorney-General, Consumer and Business Services and the policy people. The people who crunch these numbers are the Treasury people. So I'm happy to take it on notice, but it would be clear in the legislation, in terms of the gaming machine legislation, what the percentages are. I'm a bit like the honourable member. I have a recollection, but it's not the sort of numbers that I commit to my memory. We're not changing the percentages. Yeah, we're not changing the percentages. They're in the legislation, but I'm happy to take it on notice and provide an answer to the honourable member.
Franks.
Thank you, Chair. That is actually the nub of my question. Why has the government not looked at the different tiers, if you like, of those particular takes to government from that gambling revenue and perhaps tweaked that, given the casino and the hotels and pubs and clubs will all be affected in various ways by this, but that some have more to gain than others, and perhaps some should be paying more than others. So did that question attract the government at any stage in terms of changing perhaps the percentage that the casino returns to this state to a higher level than it currently is?
I'm sure at varying stages the issue may have been raised by some of the stakeholders. I know, for example... clubs is the one that I was going to say. Yeah, no, clubs have continued to highlight to me, and those of us who go to Clubs SA annual dinner, and they had a wonderful function this year, their 100th year or whatever it might happen to be. Individuals have raised the parlous nature of clubs and the fact that they do need what they would see as additional incentives or benefits or inducements, and at varying stages I know informally they've raised with me, and I suspect therefore with other members of the government at occasions, that they would like to see further taxation concessions or benefits. But look, other stakeholders similarly might have. The difficulty with the casino, Mr Chairman, and we're not really getting into too much detail about debating the taxing arrangements in relation to the casino because they're not covered in the bill, but I'm happy to respond generally. As someone who's been in opposition when the casino arrangements have come, and now that I'm in government again, I'm reminded that there are quite complicated provisions in the contractual arrangements the state has with the casino, and if certain things occur, compensation has to be paid. Now, I'm not entirely clear whether or not the taxation arrangements in relation to gaming machines fits that bill or not, but I do know in relation to certain areas there are tight contractual requirements that the state has. Certainly I know, for example, in relation to the exclusivity or the monopoly status of the casino, if the government or the parliament was ever to take a decision, there are provisions that relate to that in their contract, etc. So I'm not suggesting definitely it's in relation to gaming machines, but I do know there are complicated provisions. The simple answer to the honourable member's question is this review is largely being driven by Attorney General and Consumer and Business Services. I was obviously actively engaged by the Attorney in terms of the ongoing discussion, but the principal purpose was in relation to a whole range of regulatory issues, etc. It wasn't an issue or not. We weren't, and Treasury wasn't, and I wasn't as Treasurer, driving the opportunity to restructure completely the taxation arrangements between casino, hotels and clubs.
Ms Franks.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I thank the Treasurer for his answer, and I will ask a question on notice given he's raised this, but I don't expect an answer now. It would be of interest to know when that contract with the casino expires and what the time frame of that is. I understand that I'm unlikely to get further details necessarily of the contract itself, but I would appreciate the date that it expires in terms of that particular contractual arrangement. I'd like now to move on to the modelling that was done on the additional $1 million to the Gambling Rehabilitation Fund, existing being $3.84 million of gaming machine revenue that is hypothecated to this fund, with a $1 million increase, which sees in the answers that were given to us, a stated 25% increase in existing contributions to that fund. Given we now are set to have an increase of 2%, then 3% in gaming machine revenue to the state, will the GRF continue to be increased accordingly?
Treasurer.
Mr President, in relation to this, this was a policy decision that the government took. I think it's actually about a 25% increase in existing contributions already made to the fund, albeit that the total revenue collections coming to the state are an increase of 2%, then 3% eventually. So certainly the increase in the amount of funds going into harm minimisation measures is significantly greater than the quantum, percentage-wise anyway, coming into the budget. But in terms of the background to that, it was just simply a policy decision of the government in terms of what would be, we believe, seen to be genuinely a significant increase in the level of funding. As I said, a 25% increase in the level of funding